In this lesson, we're going to cover topic 2 in the Ages in Europe. This one specifically, we're going to talk about the development of feudalism and how it came to be. The Middle Ages in Europe include the age of chivalry, which is the 200s to the 1400s. And at this time, there was a time of knights, ladies in waiting, nobles, and kings, but it was also a time of hardship for peasants and farmers, and a time where struggle between the church and state ran rampant. Okay, so the fall of the Roman Empire happened at the end of the last unit that we covered, and it kind of sort of caused chaos where everybody no longer lived in cities. People moved out to smaller rural areas out in the country, and they developed manors. This was run by lords and nobles, and it kind of covers the stuff that we were talking about in class when I talked about feudalism and the chivalry with knights. Okay, with Roman Empire, they had a centralized government. This meant that they had one system of government, and the way that it ran is that the one system of government, the emperor told all the governors exactly how to run everything, and everyone was told to keep everything exactly the same and unified. This is probably part of the reason why the Roman Empire lasted as long as it did. It was very structured, and everybody was doing a lot of the same things, which made it very easily to keep in control of. Okay, a decentralized government after the fall of Rome. So the way that that worked is that it no longer was giving one emperor was giving instructions to all the governors. So what was going on was that all of the governors were kind of falling out, and instead they had kings popping up all over the place. When they had the kings popping up all over the place, it made things very, very difficult to keep control over what they were doing because everybody was doing something different. So, centralized versus decentralized government. In a centralized Roman government, everybody had the same laws, same language, same government. Centralized government paid governors directly, and everyone had the same religion. In a decentralized government, which is what occurred in the Middle Ages, everybody had different laws, different languages, different governments, and the local lords were paid by their locals, which were in their manors. Every manor was self sufficient, and we'll talk about that a little bit more when I get to feudalism, which is the same kind of things that I was talking about in class when I discussed feudalism. Overall, everyone had the same religion, although it did go back and forth with certain types of Christianity. Right. United in Europe. The Franks were led by Charlemagne, and he built an empire stretching from France to Italy and embraced Christianity and attempted to unite Europe. Okay, so to talk about Charlemagne a little bit. In the Middle Ages began when the Roman Empire had collapsed in 476 CE, and after several groups, including the Franks, had invaded it, the king of the Franks, Charlemagne, took control of Western Europe in 768 CE and united it for the next 50 years. In 800 CE, Charlemagne was crowned Emperor of the Romans, the Holy Roman Empire, emperor by the Pope, and it became the Kingdom of Europe. He created a combined Roman, Christian, and German elements, and he was a very powerful Christian ruler. After Charlemagne's death in 814 CE, small kingdoms formed throughout Western Europe, and these kingdoms were attacked. So at his death, there was the end of the Carolingian Empire, and along with it, the possibility of an actual unified Europe. So when these kingdoms were attacked by the Vikings, they were explorers and warriors from Northern Europe and what's now called Scandinavia. So these Vikings destroyed all the towns, and they attacked local armies, and from there a new system was needed in order to bring about order. So what resulted was a European brand of feudalism. So when the Viking invaders came, they were Germanic tribes from Scandinavia, and they raided the villages along the coast. The Franks would give them land in Normandy and converted them to Christianity. Okay, so here in this map, you'll see some areas. The purple is Scandinavia, which is where the Vikings came, and with the purple lines, you'll see the path that they took. The orange is the Muslim areas, and the Muslim invasion routes are the orange arrows. The Magyar invasions go with the green arrows and into the green section. Okay, so the Middle Ages, medieval Europe lasted from the fall of the Roman Empire in 500 till, or around 500, till about the time of the Renaissance nearing the 1400. So during this period, Europe was a disunited, rigid society based on ownership of land. So, feudalism. This was a class structure of kings, lords, lesser lords, knights, and nobility, or the highest of classes, while commoners, peasants, artisans, town people were all the lowest of classes. So, in the feudal system, it was a way of organizing economic, political, and military needs. Kings and nobles or lords owned the land but gave shares, called fiefs, to their vassals. Vassals are lesser nobles, so they're not as high up in the food chain. They created a feudal contract, which was a set of unwritten rules between the lord and his vassal. Vassals were expected to follow the landowner's rules and fight for him. Many vassals were knights, and feudal society was built around warfare. By 1000 CE, feudalism had taken over Western Europe. So, like I said, the feudal contract was a kind of an unwritten set of rules of how you act with that parcel of land. So, political power stemmed from ownership of land. Parcels of the land, which were called fiefs, would be given to the vassals or the lesser lords in exchange for military service and loyalty. Okay, so to talk about knights and chivalry very briefly, because I did discuss this in class, war was common and many nobles would train as warrior knights. Knighthood involved a strict behavior code called chivalry, which we talked about, to ensure discipline, respect. They were to defend the church and protect the defenseless. Think of this as basically a responsibility for your job, which of course everybody has. You have a list of responsibilities which you're supposed to be following in order to keep your job. Even as students, you have a list of responsibilities that you're supposed to uphold. Wear your uniform, do your assignments, don't cheat, stuff like that. That is your student code. Knights were no different. Chivalry was just their code of honor and behavior in order to keep their job. Okay, so the manorial system. So this is an economic system, and the lord's estates or manors were worked by peasants or serfs, and this created a virtual self-sufficient community. So the manors were a large self-sufficient estate with farmland and sometimes an entire village. They were ruled by lords who collected taxes and harvest from the peasants who farmed the land. Many of the peasants were serfs who were bound to the manor. Serfs couldn't even get married without permission of the lord. They could only leave the manor if they saved enough money to buy their freedom and some land, or if they escaped and survived a year and a day without getting caught. So, being a serf probably wasn't the best place, but serfs did work on their. They worked in exchange for protections of violence so that no one else could come and hurt them, and the majority of the population were serfs. And remember that serfs and peasants are slightly different because serfs are attached to the land, peasants are not. So, like I said, they were bound to the land, peasants bound peasants to the land, and they were protected workers. They were there, they would belong to the Lord, and if anything happened, the Lord was responsible for them. The lords had legal rights over their serfs. Okay, so the Roman Catholic Church, the church was a single unifying cultural element of the Middle Ages. It met the spiritual needs of the people. It also provided education. They did mission work. They helping the poor. They collected taxes or tithes, and they ran monasteries for those entering life within the church, like monks, nuns, and priests. So the Roman Catholic Church gained enormous power during the Middle Ages due to its large land holdings, and it was believed that the power over the kings that they had they had power over the kings to excommunicate those who threatened the papal power. Right. So to talk about some of the things that Charlemagne established that made him such a great leader. So, one of the most important things he did for his people was to introduce a jury system. So, this was a trial by jury rather than a trial by ordeal. So, this meant that you had people that were like you able to hear out your case in order to hopefully help that person out and make sure that you had somebody on your side because they understood where you were coming from. Charlemagne also turned his castle into a learning center, and he invited scholars from all over the world to live there. And these scholars were to create illuminated manuscripts that preserved knowledge during the Dark Ages. He also worked on expansion, and he defeated most of other barbarian tribes in Western Europe. He expanded the Frankish Empire to include Germany, all of France, most of Italy, and sections of northern Spain. So this was around the 1100s when he decided it was initially called the Holy Roman Empire. So the unification of the kingdoms throughout the empire led to the idea of a nation building. So or uniting the entire kingdom of people under one single government. So, all over Europe, larger kingdoms turned into nations with national identities, national governments. In Spain, a royal marriage united two powerful kingdoms, and in France, a long line of kings consolidated royal power. So, Franks got their names from France. In England, the process of unification began early during the Norman conquest. William of Normandy, a duke from France, also known as William the Conqueror, became king of England after his victory at the Battle of Hastings in 1066. William refined the system of taxation and royal courts that earlier Anglo-Saxons kings had begun. He gave land to Norman knights and took a census of people, manners, and animals. Around the year 1200, a successor to King William, King John, heavily taxed the English people and tried to block the Pope's choice for bishop. His poor decisions led nobles to create the Magna Carta, and the Magna Carta is a charter that limited the king's power. The king now had to consult a lawmaking council that later became the English Parliament. So, more than a century later, they had the Hundred Years' War between France and England, and this solidified each nation's boundaries and identities. The war beginning in 1337 and fought over an area of land in France called the Duchy of Gascony, and it resulted in French victory in 1453. The people lived their whole lives at war, as did their their kids, and so on. So, sounds like a whole lot of fun. Okay, so the government, Charlemagne had ruled his vast empire using local officials and called counts to help him. Each count was responsible for solving local problems, and they also had a job of finding men and raising armies for their kingdom. So basically, he was giving out pieces of land so that everybody had a job to do, and it made things a lot easier instead of him trying to completely rule everything all on his own. All right, so there was also introduced was a standardized system of money. So local administrators would collect taxes from the people, and this system was easy to abuse. So Charlemagne had introduced the standard money system. All right, so like I said, in 800, Charlemagne was crowned the Emperor of Europe by the Pope during a Christmas Mass. All right, so to recap, this was a Christian kingdom. Charlemagne was able to create a Christian kingdom under a powerful secular leader. Charlemagne was the greatest European king of the Middle Ages, and possibility of a unified Europe died with Charlemagne. He wasn't able to complete what he was starting, but the stuff that he was putting together was a great idea in theory if it would have continued. All right, that's it for this lesson. Make sure that you write down any notes, all your notes. If you need to rewatch the lesson, go ahead and do that. I'm also going to attach just the YouTube link for it in case the Ed Puzzle doesn't allow you to rewatch the videos. Make sure that any notes or any questions you may have, you write them down and I can answer them in class.